everyone. If we could get you all to sit closer to the front, that would be great. So please continue to socialize for the time being, but we would like you all to sit closer to the front if possible. Thank you.
Good evening. If you have questions, feel free to write them down. We'll be collecting them throughout. We'll have a section in the middle for Q&A and then also at the end. Thank you. We have refreshments as well. Feel free to get them before we start. Good evening, welcome. Thank you so much for coming to the Precinct 1 Harris County Fiscal Year 23-24 Budget Town Hall. It is your chance to learn about our budget process, give your preferences, ask your questions. So we're here to welcome you. We won't delay. We know you're here to hear from our great commissioner, the #1 commissioner in Harris County, Commissioner Rodney Ellis.
Thank you all. Erica does a good job. I'm the best commissioner until she's with Garcia or Briones or maybe I won't call them out. But hey, thank you all for being here. This is our second town hall meeting for the budget. And Mr. Ramos, I know one of my colleagues had 500 people. He bust a man. We don't do that. But look, this happens to be my church as well. I know y'all don't see me that often, and I show up from time to time in spandex. But I know you all are. If you're a member of the church, I know you're praying for me even when I'm not here. I want to jump right into this. When we go to Q&A, we're going to have you write your questions out and pass them in, because even at the church that I attend, now you know what we do. When we got a mic, it turns to a keynote address. We are going to end promptly at 7:30 because we try to stick to the time allotted that we tell people. And I have one more stop to make tonight. Yes, I am wearing linen pants. It's 105 degrees out there. With the heat index, it's like 110. So it says a lot for anybody to come out on a night like this. This is the first year that Harris County has had budget community meetings to come out to you and talk about it. And I want to thank Mr. Ramos for coming up with the idea. He hails from Baltimore by way of Los Angeles. But it was a very good idea. There's nothing more important that we do than how we spend your money. There's nothing more important that you do, by the way, than how you spend your money. Because how money is spent is really the most important statement about somebody's values. And if you really believe in something, you invest in it. And it's just important to remember that. And I always remember I went to a conference once when I was in state legislature, and they said that document, the state's budget, is really more of a statement about the values of the state. In this case, the values of the county government than anything else. The 5 of us on the governing board of the county, might I add, really reflect your values. Now, here's how it normally works during the budget cycle with all of the county departments or anybody, any community. Most people are just interested in whatever piece of the pie they need. And to be honest with you, they really don't care that much about the rest of it. You know, I tell my staff we can come up with all these grand plans, but all most people care about is just what's in their backyard. That's a big challenge. Because if all of us just cared about what was in our backyard, it'd be pretty hard for us to have a neighborhood, to have a city or a county or a community. You just can't do it. So in the position we're in, a lot of times it's telling people no. I was talking to someone that had a great idea on how we could spend money at an event the other day, and I made the comment, maybe I missed it. You know I have a pretty dry sense of humor. Maybe I missed it. But I didn't see you all down there when a couple of my colleagues didn't show up and we went to the no new revenue rate. That means in a county, to my knowledge, that has always grown. I'm reading some old dissertation, well, not that old, it's 1975, I was coming out of college, that somebody did about the slave trade in Texas. Daniel, I'll try to get you a copy. It was really kind of interesting. This city was always founded on the basis of transportation. You had a couple of New York land speculators who lied and said Buffalo Bayou was navigable because you needed a place where to do trade, you should have a place where you could bring in slaves or bring in cotton. It was all based on cotton. So it was a combination of the Allen brothers fibbing a little bit and Buffalo Bayou being flooded at the right time so you could get people to buy land thinking that you could really bring products. A lot of it was what came from the backs of human cargo, cotton. Wasn't necessarily grown in this area, in the immediate area, but this was a direct route from cotton fields, not far away, to the port of Galveston. So you could do commerce. And the big competition was St. Louis, New Orleans. You know, some issue about whether or not we'd overtake Galveston, that was never really realistic. You know, up until the great flood of 1900 or 1901, Galveston was the largest city in Texas. Houston was the capital of the Republic for a while, until either the mosquitoes or the lack of people got to them, and somebody had the bright idea or the heat to move it on inland to Austin. Or maybe they figured out that it wasn't quite possible at the time to make that bayou navigable. Of course, with a lot of work and a lot of ingenuity, it is navigable now, the Port of Houston. But it was a real, I'm only on page 30, but I'm into it. I wish it was, if it wasn't so long, if I figure out how to put it on my iPad, I could read more of it, but I'm flipping page to page. It was kind of interesting. Marsh Rice, of all people, was the largest investor in what became the Houston Navigation District. It was a little entity they put together to clean that ditch that became the Port of Houston. But look, you got to focus on more than just your neighborhood. And we all have to realize how important transportation has been in the history of this region. And it has always grown. Rarely have there been instances when the place didn't grow. We went for 2 years with no additional revenue. And we're still reeling from the impact of that. I want to give you some little sense of how we split up the money. By the way, here's a breakdown. The budget allocation is about $2.3 billion. Mr. Ramos, if we pull together everything we control, you know, the general operating budget and turn it on, and also Harris Health. You know, I was talking to someone from Miami-Dade the other day, which is considerably smaller than we are. I thought they said that budget was $7 billion, but I'm assuming they were counting the health care. We treated it separate. It has an independent board, but we appoint the board. That's another $2 billion.
Our total budget is $5.2 billion, along with another 1.6 at the hospital district that's not taxed.
You count toll road?
Correct.
Okay, count the toll road. So if you count what we do at Harris County and you count hospital district health care, we don't call it Harris Health now. If you're old as I am, it's still hospital district in my mind. And the toll road, 5.2 billion. Here's a breakdown on general operating budget, which is really what we're talking about tonight. $941 million for safety. I define that as traditional boots on the ground.
And the courts.
And the courts. 574 million, justice. How you gonna define that?
Sorry. Safety is law enforcement and justice is the courts. Sorry.
Okay, so justice and public safety comes to 63% of the $2.3 billion. That's justice and public safety, 63%, that's $1.52 billion. Constables, $223 million. The DA's budget, $4.8 million. Sheriff and jail, $687 million. JP's, $29.7 million. Now, I just go through that to just give you, I want to always make the case. So I'm talking about the general operating budget. So when you get through with all of that, it's just about all gone. That's 63% of the $2.3 billion. Environment, $10 million. There's very little power that the county has over environmental issues, particularly in a state like Texas where the state leaders preempt so much of what we can do. Now, from my vantage point, if you go check the air quality, obviously they're not doing it, but they preempt what we can do on the local level. $10 million, that's our environmental budget. Housing and economic opportunity, $71 million, that's 3% of the budget. Environment is 0.4. Transportation, $80 million. Now count toll road and a host of other things, metro, that's separate. I'm talking about the county, I'm not talking about the city. Commissioners Court, $163 million, that's $6.8 million. The way we divide up the county, the 4 commissioners run the parks, they run the operations in their offices as well. If I had my druthers, we'd combine some of it. Although my colleagues don't agree, maybe one day they will, I think it would create some efficiencies. I don't think it would take away from any of my power. For what it's worth, until I got here, to my knowledge, no commissioner's office had a policy department. When you ask why is a policy department important, I always use this little story. One of my guys who retired, I love him dearly, was in the Road and Bridge Department. He said, well, Commissioner, why do you need a policy department since he was in charge of roads? And I said, well, Deotis, I'm not interested in just trying to build a road from here to there. I want to help people build a road to a better future. That's why a policy department is important, and we put that together. Public health, $86 million. Harris Health is separate. Let's put it this way. Historically, Harris Health is where you go when you need the surgery. You got me? When the diabetes is there, you got to have dialysis. The health department is where you go when you do the preventative stuff, like don't eat some of the stuff you ate over there tonight. You got me? Now, if I had my druthers, and we are encouraging Harris Health to focus a little more on the prevention side. For those of you who have followed me over the years, you notice how I've gone up and down. I know the number one cause of death is what you eating. Number one cause of death in the West and in many developing countries is what we eat. It's what causes most of the issues. So it's a constant battle. Trust me, it's miserable. So you need to put more money into public health, in my judgment. What's the solution? You want to know how to lose weight? If it tastes good, don't eat it. That's basically what all the diets I've been on. What the bottom line is, that's what it comes down to. If it tastes good, don't eat it. And when you eat it, you want more of it. Last one, governance and customer service. That's $460 million. This is your opportunity tonight to walk through what we do on the budget. My staff, some of you I saw at the last one, so I know you're going to get tired if I walk through all these talking points again. I want to say this about the public safety part. It's one of the most important things we do. And if we could just keep investing more money into that 63% pot, if that's all it took to help us solve crime, I think we'd have solved it by now. Because most commissioners' courts in the history of the county, going back to, I think I read in there, they called them the, whatever they were, the precursor to the Texas Rangers. I looked it up to see who they were, whatever the term was. And part of that job was to go out as we were, our founding fathers that were men were taking the land from the Native Americans, go out and whip up on them a little bit. I'm not knocking it. I'm just giving you history. Maybe they called it merit, whatever the term was, whatever they would describe. We've always done that. And usually for most people, the focus is, we just want more money in traditional law enforcement. We have invested some money in non-traditional things that have worked in other communities. You know, part of it is if you do violence interruption programs. You hire people who go in these communities who maybe come out of that world of creating problems. And you get them to help people learn how to solve their disputes with something other than a gun and a knife and a fist. It's not a lot of money, but we put some money into that. It's been federal money for the most part. We also created an alternative program when you call people. Instead of everybody calling the police department, the constable, the sheriff, we call law enforcement for everything. Your neighbor's music is too loud. Somebody's having a mental health breakdown with no weapon. We call the police department. A cat's in a tree. Your child in a tree. And some of those things, those calls can be diverted to somebody else who can do it and will not cost as much as law enforcement. But I want to stress that because it is controversial. There are those who want you to fall for a soundbite. And they think somehow if you just put more money in law enforcement, traditional law enforcement, all of the problems will go away. That will not happen. You got to invest enough in it, but you got to do some creative things that have been in other places. The taxpayers in Texas, on average, pay $20,000 per year for each individual who's in jail. I'm not looking at my notes. Is that per year? That $20,000?
It's about $100,000 for one inmate per year,
Yeah.
or $100 a day.
$100 a day. So obviously, and most of them in there have a mental health challenge. So maybe at some point, if we put more focus on the mental health side before they end up committing a violent act, or you do something to divert it, it would help. But I want to mention that to you because it takes time to do that. Now with that, I want to turn this over to Daniel Ramos, who has done a great job, and he's got a tough job. We're going to decide on a bond issue later on this week, whether or not we're going to put the language on the ballot or what the language will be for Harris Health as an example. And I was thinking, Mr. Ramos, and you give a precursor to a point I'm going to raise when we vote on that, is that in the assumptions that we're making on what the tax rate increase will be for a $2.5 billion bond issue, I remember that it said, we're assuming that there's no major catastrophe. The assumption I make is related to the weather. Now, when that came on the agenda, we hadn't had the largest number of days over 100 degrees in the history of the city, so I am going to ask, who was their weather forecaster? Because with all of that hot water, now they're saying we are probably in store for, more hurricanes. You never know where it will hit. You hope it doesn't hit anybody, but if it is coming and it hits here, who knows what it means? I always remind people, Harvey was not a hurricane event. That was a rain event. The hurricane went somewhere else, but the rain came here. And I know people will be discussing what happens with the NRG complex. Bishop Dixon is on that board. He and I will, when somebody asked if I want to see him, I said, I've talked to him 5 times a day. Do I need to see him again? But he'll come in and welcome us to this church at some point. But look, the state operates primarily off of sales tax. So while all of you, everybody was hooping and hollering in Austin, all happy, $18 billion they gave out in property tax relief. Most of the people in Precinct 1 don't own their house. Hear what I said? Most of them don't own their house. I want to see the landlord who reduces rent because they got some of that $18 billion. B. That came from, guess what? Sales tax. State operates on the basis of sales tax. The city gets some sales tax. The county does not. We get some hot tax. We get the smallest portion of the hotel occupancy tax. So I was making the comment to someone talking to me about need to improve NRG. I said, you know, I'm proud and excited that the World Cup will be here. You have people checking in hotels, I hope. The county will get the least amount of money from that. You have people shopping at restaurants, buying clothes. The county gets none of that. So if I were making a fiduciary responsible decision about the World Cup as it relates to Harris County, it has no impact. And there'll be a nice press release. So when we talk about what we do to improve that facility, because if we didn't have the NRG complex, there'd be no World Cup. Mr. Ramos, they may be coming in asking for about $500 million worth of repairs. Keep the football
Fresh
team,
out.
you know, keep the football team, you know. If there is a hurricane, we are servicing the debt on the bonds that we issue to improve your parks, flooding, a host of other issues, some law enforcement facilities in there as well. $1.2 billion. That's $1.2 billion. If we have to build a new jail, I'm just telling you, you know, at some point we got to make that decision. People are going to go to jail. And if we make the decision, I don't know where my colleagues are, what we'll do, either to invest a substantial amount of money into rehabbing that old meat storage packing plant downtown Harris County Jail. You notice the windows? They're not real. That is a meat packing plant. It has no windows. So when they built it, they put windows up so it would blend in with the environment. But nobody can see out in the old jail. In the new one we built, there are some windows at the top. Now, most people who go to jail are going to get out at some point. So part of what you got to do is figure out how you don't recycle them. They will come out at some point. So what do you do? I mean, they commit a crime, they got to serve their time. And in that jail, they're innocent until proven guilty. Or that's what we say, you know, we believe in. But so there are other big pots in terms of investing money. I want to say this. We do have in our region, we always brag about being having a lower tax rate than most places in the country. What we don't brag about is we also are lower in what we do in terms of services. If you think I'm wrong, I won't repeat the numbers again, but you can pull them up on where we invest our money. It's a statement about who we are. How we invest our money is a statement about our values. With that, I want to bring up Mr. Ramos, the Budget Director of Harris County. Thank you for being here.
Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Ramos. It's particular torture that I have this handheld mic because I talk with my hands. So if you guys can't hear me, just let me know. Very quickly, we're going to go through just the presentation to get everybody centered on what goes on in our budget. So moving to the next slide. Our budget is organized by goal areas. The commissioner mentioned a couple of them. I'm not going to go through all of them, but essentially every department of the county gets assigned to one of these goal areas. Those goal areas all have performance measures attached to them, so we know if we're adding additional money into justice and safety, are we processing cases faster? Are we responding to emergency 911 calls in a shorter response time? Each one of those departments has performance measures attached to them, and our commissioner staff meet once a month to review those performance, or once a quarter to review those performance measures. Again, trying to tie how much are we spending to what are we actually getting? What are the services you all are feeling? In terms of our timeline, budgeting is a year-round exercise, but we really kick off in May. We do what's called the current level of service forecast, and what that is we add up all the decisions Commissioner Ellis and his colleagues have made to date and figure out how much is it going to cost to run the county the exact same way next year. So we look at everything that we've done so far or decided so far, and we layer on things like inflation, our cost of health care, the cost of gas and electricity, and we compare that against the number of how much we expect to receive in revenue. From that, we set out a budget proposal process. If we have a surplus, we say, department head, what can we do to further your mission? This year, we had a deficit. That meant if you added up all of Commissioner's Court's decisions to date, we actually had less money than what we're projected to get. And we turned around and we went to department heads and we said, what would you do with 2% less? And we reviewed all of those proposals. We turned them over to the commissioner's offices and their staff. And at this point, we're in the process, and actually the budget just went live on making decisions. So we introduced the budget next Tuesday. It's actually on our website right now. And at that point, it stops being my budget, and it really becomes the commissioners. And they're gonna do budget amendments to reflect their priorities. From there, once we adopt a budget, we upload it into the system, the new fiscal year starts, and we start the process all over again. Very quickly, just in terms, if you want, we're doing these meetings in the community. There's also the opportunity to come and have your voice heard at the formal meetings. We'll have one August 22nd, August 29th, September 12th, and September 19th. We made it easy for everybody. It's all at 10 a.m., and it's all at our main county administration building at 1001 Preston. So where the money comes from, so the overall county budget is $5.2 billion. We're gonna really be focusing on the general fund today, and the reason for that is it's where we have the most flexibility. It's what funds most of our core operations. It's what pays for my salary, the commissioner's salary, most of the the sheriff and constable deputies. It's also the most unrestricted. Most of the other funds, whether they're grants or proprietary funds, they all come with strings attached. We can't move money from the flood control district and give it to the Harris Health. So very quickly on taxes, I'm sure all of you that own property, you see your tax bill sometime in November and December and you curse my name. What I want to say is there has been a concerted effort over many years. This will be the 6th year where we are recommending a tax rate cut. So what does that mean? So here in Harris County, we've been very fortunate. Property values are skyrocketing. This past year, they're up 12% over last year. That doesn't necessarily mean your taxes are gonna go up by 12%. So in a state like Maryland, where we had a flat tax rate, your assessments went up 6%, your taxes went up 6%. Here in Texas, we do things a little bit different. Your property taxes can only go up 3.5% in any given year. So where does the general fund come from? And part of the reason that you see such high property taxes, especially compared to some other states, other jurisdiction, is it's the system that the state of Texas has created. We are very reliant on property taxes because we're not allowed to charge things like income tax, transfer and recordation tax, things that we're able to diversify our funding levels or our revenues and take some of the onus off of property owners and renters. About 20% of our budget is non-property tax revenue. Most of those are statutorily set by either the state or would require an act of Commissioner's Court to change. So I know commissioners stole my thunder a little bit, but about 63% of our budget is in justice and safety. When you take out the non-departmental spending, that number actually goes up to 67%. 44% of it is in traditional law enforcement. That's the constable, the sheriff, the fire marshal, and the district attorney. So we're gonna do an exercise in a second where you're gonna be able to come into my shoes, into commissioner's shoes, and adjust the budget to reflect your priorities. And what we're gonna do with that information is we're gonna take all the submissions, so this is our 7th or 8th meeting, we're gonna take all the submissions and we're gonna cut it by precinct, by zip code, all the ways that we can, and present to Commissioner's Court and say, hey, for everybody that participated in the budget process, this is what they said. So we're gonna go through an exercise in a second, or if you don't mind going back real quick, Lindsay. But I just wanna flag, so there's two polar opposites in what the commissioner referred to as the no new revenue rate. What that is if you can't adopt a tax rate, you default to what's called the no new revenue rate. And essentially what that means is you get the exact same revenue as you did last year. It doesn't matter what your actual costs are. So in the simulation you're about to do, it's actually, you're gonna start with a $180 million deficit. So what that means is you're gonna have to do some combination of raising taxes or cutting departments to get to balance. And then at the very top of our tax rate, we have a $10 million deficit. So again, you guys aren't gonna get out of here without doing a little bit of work. You're gonna be able to sit in my shoes and be able to balance the budget that best reflects your values and your priorities. So going to Q&A, Erica.
We're just going to have a short Q&A, just if you have any questions related to what he presented or just anything you've heard thus far. Do you have any forms completed that you want to submit? Or does anyone need any forms still? No? Oh, I see one. Okay.
Well,
Can
while
some
I'm
of-
doing that, I meant to thank.
Some of the CECs help collect forms.
Yeah, I want to make, while I do it, I wanted to make sure I thank the church for Community of Faith for having us, and give them a round of applause. I know Bishop Dixon is in his office watching an important trial.
Janae, can you help collect forms, Janae?
And I want to thank my staff. They do a great job, by the way. Give them all a round of applause. They do a wonderful job.
Okay, with the new bond coming up, what has been the projected mental health investment, maybe? Interventions. Are you asking, is that going to be included in the bond? Are mental health interventions going to be included in the bond? Would- Mental health, yes. So she's wanting to know what kind of increases or improvements we're going to make in mental health, or is the bond have any relation to it?
I know the bond package will only be for capital expenditures. And Ms. Ramos, feel free to drop in. I don't know that Harris Health does the mental health part. That's the Harris Center. I know if we had to do over again, I wasn't here, maybe we shouldn't have called Harris Health and Harris. Maybe should have left one of them in the hospital district. Maybe should, but that would be Harris Center. And Ms. Ramos, help me on that funding. We put some up, a good bit of it comes to us by way of the state or federal government. But if you would just walk through the different Harris Center, Harris Health.
Sure. So the Harris Health System, which operate Ben Taub and LBJ hospitals, we're about a third of their budget. So we set a tax rate. So when you get your property tax bill, you'll have, it'll say Harris County 4 times. One is the general fund, which we're talking about today. One's the flood control district. One's the port, and then one is the HHS. We're about a third of their overall budget. So the other 2/3 are what they charge patients, either through their insurance or directly. They also receive, it's really federal funding that flows through the state, which is the Medicaid supplemental for how many folks that they serve that don't have insurance.
Answer is no, because that bond package is to build a new LBJ, is to rehab Ben Taub, but it wouldn't be for operating. Now, if somebody has a mental health issue, obviously, they could end up in Ben Taub. So I'm assuming that there's some benefit for the mental health side. The center mainly does, is that what the jail does most of it, to be honest with you. That may be a separate bond issue. I don't want these mics too close to each other. I think, unfortunately, most of our mental health services, probably in the Harris County Jail. I mean, over half the people in there do have some mental health issue.
There will also be, if it does pass Commissioner's Court, so it's on the agenda for the 17th, so this Thursday, there will be bond outreach that is done. So similar to these town halls, and similar if you attended any of the ones for the road and park bond that just passed, there'll be a similar outreach set up. What I can also tell you is, like, one of the things that they've struggled with, and one of the components of the bond, or 2 components of the bond, one is community centers. Right now, they rent a lot of their facilities, and they don't necessarily reflect where their patients are. So they're moving to more ownership, and they're going to be consolidating a lot of their services so that they align with, if they have a cardiac clinic, it's going to be in areas that have high prevalence of cardiac. They're also going to be, one component of the bond is when they build a new LBJ, they're going to retrofit the old LBJ to do outpatient. So I believe some of that may be mental health. I would defer to Harris Health Services, but I know at this point they're physically out of space for how much we've grown as a county.
And if we just vote to put it on the ballot for you all to decide, for the healthcare piece, not the mental health piece, the healthcare piece, and there will be aggressive outreach. I know there may be an announcement later this week. We had a meeting here. I don't know if you were there. And Dr. Porce was here and some of the board members from Harris Health. And Bishop Dixon has organized folks to do a community benefits agreement. And I'm familiar with some of it. You know, I voted to move forward with it, but I had some reservations, but I hope to be for it. The facility's really outgrown, and the tax rate we have is nowhere near that of Dallas or any of the urban areas. But with that said, we want to make sure there's equity in what we do. And that's what Bishop and that coalition he pulled together at the meeting here a month ago are working on. So I'm hoping there'll be some progress.
Thank you. And just wanted to note, we'll also respond to a lot of the written questions because we do want to get to the simulation, and we'll have a lot of staff walking around to answer questions. This question will help the budget simulation. How much of the budget, excluding overall administrative costs, will directly impact Precinct 1?
So the recommended budget is about 39 million for Precinct 1 directly. I don't know exactly how that's split out between road and bridge, parks, et cetera. I don't know if one of your staff can answer that. Precincts also receive an allocation for mobility funds, so that's the HECTRA surplus that we're allowed to use on road and bridge projects. So a lot of the staff that you see that's filling potholes or rebuilding roads is paid out of that. We actually just voted, Commissioners Court just voted to increase that allocation by 70 million. I believe your portion is somewhere in the 22, 25 million to expedite not only road projects, but also road drainage projects that have been promised for a long time.
I mean, it's a lot better than it was in the past. You know, Harris County has the distinction of being the only place in America where there are more people in unincorporated Harris County than there are in the city of Houston. So in the past, they allocated the transportation money based on the number of road miles each precinct had. They didn't count the roads that were in the city. And it was all kind of made up numbers anyway on how they did road miles, because sometimes in the old days you have a commissioner, my picture won't be Potbelly County Commissioner building roads, and some developers say, can you run a road over here? Then on their land, of course, and then they build the housing. So since we've been in, I have fought to change that, and it's a lot more equitable. Sometimes the argument is equity to some people means, okay, now we're going to divide it equally. And forget about when I got there, I think when Commissioner Lee was in, it might have been about 18%. And then when he passed away, they cut it down to 14%, assuming that old Rodney would not play ball. And they were right, he did not play ball. But that's why the composition of that court, I've had a modest role in changing the composition of that court. But there is a focus now on equity. But I want to stress this. We've spent more money out of the Precinct 1 budget that you give us than has ever been spent in the city of Houston in the history of the county. But I do have to remind my friends at the city, they don't give me any money to help with Harris Health or when they arrest people to go to the jail. You know, so when they say, well, Rodney, we pay taxes too, y'all help us. Remember what I said, more people in unincorporated Harris County than there are in the city of Houston. I have more in the city of Houston than any other precinct. But let me tell you, I don't get caught up. I didn't do when I was in the Senate or when I was on city council. I know it's a community. It's not just my precinct. And since I drew the lines, they changed a bit anyway. But we're doing a heck of a lot more to be equitable under the leadership of this court than the county has ever done in the past. But it's challenging to break old habits. But Precinct 2 and Precinct 1 are getting far more than they got in the past. But, you know, we're going to get something. They told me when I got there, they said, well, Rodney, you know, your precinct, we got the jail for you. And most of the people in the jail, this is what my former colleagues would tell me, that's mainly your precinct. I said, we'd like to have less of that.
Okay, thank you. We're going to do the budget simulation, and then we'll get back to some of these questions, and also we'll be walking around. That'll be a short time where you all can talk to all the staff while you're doing it. So Daniel's going to explain that. Director Ramos, sorry.
So if everyone can take their phone out, and I think that there's some iPads from the staff. If folks don't have a smartphone, please just raise your hand and we'll get you taken care of. It's going to look a little scary to begin with, but we have plenty of staff here. My staff, please stand up, raise your hand. These are all, thank you all for putting up with me over the last month. As I put the budget together, I get a lot more eccentric and a lot more stressed out. They'll be around to answer any questions, so if you don't understand it right away, just give it a few minutes, raise your hand, and we'll have a staff. Commissioner Ellis' staff, I know you guys also got trained. Can you guys raise your hands? All of them, I'm sure, would be willing to help as well through the simulation. So if you could take your phone out and very quickly take a photo of this QR code and pull up a simulation. We'll give it a couple seconds for folks to get through. And then we'll walk through it very quickly. Yep, feel free to stand up and get closer if you guys. Okay, it seems like we got a critical mass here. We're gonna walk through it really quickly. Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind pulling it up. Okay, so you're gonna end up on this page. If you do not get to this page, just we'll get through it, and then again, my staff will be walking around to help support folks. You can click through the video, you can X that out. If you wanted to put your precinct and your zip code, please do. It is helpful for us to know who is filling these out. When you get to this page, this is kind of the first decision that you get to. Again, I warned you, the picture looks very ugly if we were to go to the no new revenue rate. That's what we default to. If you are willing, if that is something that aligns with your values, you can press the green button, and as you do that, it raises the amount of revenue that we get. If you were to max it out, so as you can see, when you hit a certain point, we go up to the voter approved rate. That's where the state of Texas says, there's a law in the books, you guys cannot raise the taxes any more than this without going to the voters. If you were to go to that rate, it's roughly $60 a year on a $300,000 house. So just keep that in mind. And if you click next, you go to our fees and services. Again, a lot of those are statutorily set, so we don't have a lot of authority over them, so those are locked. And then you go to the spending side. So if you go into justice, again, that makes up about $574 million of our budget. A lot of this is the courts and the support systems around the court. If you think that the number one thing that we should be doing is children and family support services, you would press green to increase the budget. And again, as you increase the budget for an item, it's gonna make your deficit look worse. Or you can say, I don't think we need as many prosecutors. You press the red button, and that lowers the amount of funding for those departments, or for that department. If you go to public safety, it's the constables, the sheriff, the jail, and the fire marshal. And then scroll all the way down to Commissioner's Court, Lindsay. If your number one issue or one of your top priorities is parks and trails, road and bridge, or community centers, you would come down, it's in Commissioner's Court. It's actually, the budget goes directly to the commissioner and they manage it internally. But again, if parks is your number one issue, you would press the the green button to increase funding. If roads, you're one of the lucky ones here in the city of Houston, you have roads, you have sidewalks, you say, hey, we can spend a little bit less, you would press the red button to lower the amount. So basically, green is good, red is bad, and what we're looking for is just directionally. We don't manage the county by survey, so don't worry that if I press red, I'm gonna have my community center reduce funding. But directionally, what we're trying to get to is, what are your priorities? We're in a situation now where we really have to offset any new spending with either higher taxes or less spending in other departments. So we want to say, like, you know, balance your budget that reflects your priorities. If you want to see less public safety, press that red button. At some point, it'll stop you and say, we've hit the state minimum spending on that item. So we give the example here that at some point it says, hey, you need to go to the voters before you can lower the funding for the constables anymore. And if you want public health, you would press the green button to increase funding for that department. So again, my staff is walking around. Again, raise your hands. Precinct 1 staff, raise your hands. I'm sure you're all being voluntold to help out here. Please, I'll be walking around as well. Please ask any questions, but we'll be walking around trying to help folks if they are trying to figure out the simulation. So we're gonna take about 15 minutes to get this filled out, and then we're gonna come back with the results, have a quick discussion, and I'll continue to answer all your questions.
So we'll take about five minutes to work on this on your devices, and we'll walk around, and we'll also take more questions once these results. And you're going to see the results that you're doing right now. They're going to share them on the screen. Thank you. to do about 2 minutes, 2 minutes left. Okay, raise your hand if you need more time. I think we're about to, Director Ramos, come up. 2 more minutes, okay. Forty-five seconds. Grants, yeah. Okay, we're gonna get your last minute votes in, but we're gonna display what you submitted. But for, yeah, I'm gonna give, thank you for those who came in. So we have the technological way to submit your preferences, but a lot of you, when you came in, we gave you 10 stones to give you represent the limitation of our revenue and budget, and we had the 8 county goals that some of you put your preferences in our vases. So first, I'm gonna give you those outcomes, and then we'll share the full-scale simulation that you just did. So we had, for transportation, 8 stones. For governance and customer service, which may not know includes elections, we had 10 stones. For economic opportunity, we had 14 stones. Feel free to clap if you were supporting that. For environment, we had 14 stones. For justice and safety, we had 19 stones. For flooding, we had 30 stones. Okay. For housing, we had 30 stones. And I think we had a great policy person over public health with 42 stones. Because that includes our violence interruption program in addition to prevention and resources for diabetes and asthma. I don't know if budget has, she may be busily trying to get her slide up, but Director Ramos?
Lindsay,
Or
are
you
we
want me
ready?
to take a question?
Okay. So this is the first time I'm going to see the results too, so there's a little bit of neck craning. So a little bit different, folks seem to have voted a little bit differently with their stones than they did with the app, but and in most cases, in most of the meetings we've attended, justice was the number one thing folks increased. It also was the number one thing folks decreased. So about half of you are at war with the other half, which is how I feel at Commissioner's Court when mommy and daddy don't get along. Public health was number 2. Housing and economic development, Commissioner's Court. Lindsay, was that roads, parks? Parks and trails. So I know Commissioner Ellis, that's a priority of yours. And then governance and customer service. The biggest decreases were justice, governance and customer service. I'll try not to take that personally because that's where my budget is. Public safety was the number 3 decrease. Housing and economic development and Commissioner's Court. So as you can see, it's very difficult to try and balance the budget. We hope it was a little insightful for you all and kind of stepping into my seat, into Commissioner Ellis's seat, in the different levers that you have to pull. Unfortunately, there are no easy answers. So, but we appreciate your feedback. We're gonna take all this information, we're gonna transmit it to Commissioner's Court. We'll have it on our website. We're gonna continue to have this on our website. So if you have friends that wanna participate, please send it to them. Our budget book's also live, starting today, which we're really proud of. And I believe it's budget.harriscounty.tx. But there's a whole section of if you just Google Harris County budget, you'll get to our main page, and there's a splash zone on that has the Balancing Act. It'll also have our budget publications.
I want to stress that the purpose of that was to give, as Mr. Ramos said, give you a sense of we have. Now, don't think that we make a decision on what we don't think we'll make a decision on what we do with the budget based on how we voted tonight, because then it wouldn't quite be a democracy. It would mean who showed up or how it was explained to you. So like, Daniel, when you said, if you want to decrease justice, then you want to put a negative there. You didn't mean it that way, but but it just gives you some sense of what we go through when we're trying to balance the equations to figure out what to do. All right, we'll go back to questions.
And I'll kind of hybrid the questions, but how does our long-term planning on where we hope, like you said, building the bridge for residents, inform the budget process? I don't know if that's for Commissioner Daniel, but
Say it again.
how does the county's long-term planning, like where we're trying to take residents, building that bridge, inform the budget process, inform?
So in terms of the county's growth and where it's growing, we have to take that into consideration. We have to figure out, and that's part of the reason we do the current level service forecast, is how much is it going to cost to run the county the exact same way next year? You know, before you start getting into the policy, what are the caseloads at, you know, the public defender? What's the average response time? What we are trying to do is look at our economic development toolbook. Like, you know, Houston is a land of opportunity. I've certainly realized that in my 18 months here. But we're trying to figure out how do we make sure that the development that is happening is the development we want. So I'm very proud that we passed the first ever tax abatement program for the affordable housing. We're bringing on a consultant to do an economic development toolbox so we can figure out ways of, it's not just building a road out in the far exurbs of the county. It's figuring out ways, how do we build density? How do we build affordability so that we're not having to double up on building, because if you build a house, you got to build a road to it, you got to maintain that road in perpetuity. And so figuring out ways that we can develop density is really important and impacts how we plan in the future.
I wanted to think about it a little bit. And the reason we don't, because if we let you do it, then we'll have to let everybody kind of, just write it down for her and let them know. We'll get you one. But look, what we can't do is make a decision that we're going to just invest money wherever we're growing and ignore the places where it's already grown. You get me? So in other words, we can't decide we're just going to invest our money in the shiny new thing. We're spread out. I'm not sure about the county, but the city of Houston is the second largest city in the country in terms of land mass. And the largest one is not a city you think of, is Jacksonville, Florida. It was when I was on city council. And we put these toll roads in so it's easier to get around. Now, it costs a lot more money to service that. Some people move, maybe some of us, move to an unincorporated area because taxes are lower. You won't have to pay city taxes, or you just have to pay taxes to the county. And then you find out when you get out there, there are no services. Well, now here's the reality of it. None of us would be here if the city of Houston was not here. We just wouldn't be here. Most of us wouldn't be here if the medical center was not here. We're going to get ill at some point. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have the port. But there was no way to do that shipping. So you can't just decide because somebody goes and builds, some developer buys some land way out somewhere because there's a toll road, and then says, now you all pick up the tab. At least for the unincorporated areas I have, when they come to me and say, well, we got this community, we built this road, and now we want you to come and we need the road widened. Sometimes I'll tell them, well, did you think about that before you built it? But you just go build it, and you sold it. There are communities where a developer goes in and sell people a bill of goods when it's brand new and shiny. Then when it falls apart, that community is left having to come to the county asking me, can I get everybody else to pay because they got duped? And it's a balancing equation to figure out how it works. I took a trip to Bogota, Colombia. I'd never been. My son wanted to go before starting law school. It was interesting that they have earthquakes there, but they put in building standards a long time ago. Most people live in high-rises that don't fall down as quickly as they do in some U.S. cities because the developers kind of control the politics. And you got to spend money to go and do it. And I was thinking, you got all this land, why wouldn't you spread out more? They are the model for a massive bus rapid transit system. Our community is in so many ways defined by if you have a car. And this is a challenge. As housing costs go up in the inner city, people who cannot afford housing have to move farther and farther out, away from the jobs, away from the services. We didn't go after mass transit money when the federal government was subsidizing it. When we should have. Los Angeles made that mistake as well, because the American dream was a home with a yard and all of that, but then we can't afford it. You know, we all talk about climate change, and I joked at the other meeting, but everybody wants to, during the winter, they want to sleep under a sheet, and in the summer, they want to sleep under a blanket. You know, and then when the grid fails, you say, well, we're not going to invest in it. It's a big it's a balancing act. Bishop, I know you're here. I want to let you greet us, although we're going to take a few more questions. But look, we appreciate. I mentioned to him, you know, when I came in, your staff said, "Do you want to visit with Bishop?" I said, "I talk to him 5 times a day. I remember what it looks like 5 times this day." I think starting when I woke up, you text me first. Take another question. Come on up, though, Bishop. You know all of this.
Good evening. Y'all must have some really rough days. Good evening. Yes. Listen, thank y'all so very much for coming. We appreciate you being here. And I apologize, I'm in 3 places at the same time while I'm talking to you as we speak. And but certainly honored to have Commissioner Ellis to bring this conversation here to the Community of Faith Church. As you know, we are a community kind of church, and we love helping to get people in touch with information. And so thank you for bringing this to our community, to the north side of town, as the mayor would say, to the fofo. And we'll give him a hand, won't you? And I'll say this, I'm sure you pay attention, but Commissioner Ellis is doing an incredible job as an elected official. Most people had not known what a county commissioner is or does, but he has redefined the position. I would hate to run for this seat after he finishes because he has lifted the bar so high in terms of what the position is meant to do and what it's capable of as it relates to impacting the total community on a number of levels, from MWBE to stuff with you know, all the disparity studies that he has called for and helped pay for. Y'all, did you talk about that tonight?
No, we just stuck on the budget, because you know they'll get on me, my staff. Erica and them will say, he getting to rambling. Old Rodney's going on something else now.
Well, since I'm not going to ramble, let me just say that Commissioner Ellis, a few years ago, started dealing with the issue of public entities, school districts, community colleges, the port, Metro, underperforming in terms of procurement opportunities for minorities and women. And if you have kept up with those studies, he called for disparity studies. And when he called flack from then, the county commissioners who were there then, he paid $650,000 out of his own budget for the studies. And the studies proved that not enough women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses were getting opportunities in those, and it's changing things. My point is, I'm glad that you're here to get the information tonight, but you just need to know a little bit more about what he's doing and what his office is doing to make a difference for you every day. Not just making sure that the budget is handled right, but also making sure that every community in his precinct and others around the county are benefiting from what Harris County has to offer. So thank you for fighting those good fights.
Thank
we
you, Bishop.
appreciate that.
Bishop, I want to say you're such a great ally. I know y'all are close to getting a community benefits agreement worked out with Harris Health. You know, Daniel, what I learned, if you're in a fight, you got to turn your back. You want somebody who will cover your back. Oh, Bishop Dixon will do it. You know, and I know it hadn't been worked out yet, and I know there are some nuances there, but it is important. And this church, by the way, folks and visitors who are here now, you ought to come back on Sunday morning. First, you get to see me in spandex when it cools off a little bit. Right now, it's too hot. I can't ride this far. Somebody, look.
He rides his bike to church, what he's trying to tell you. That's,
Yeah.
not spandex like y'all imagine it.
In this heat, I would need that chariot. They'd be saying, swing low, sweet chariot to get me back home. If I rode out here 16 miles from my house, I can't get back.
Yeah.
But Bishop, thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
And we're gonna take a few more questions. I'm all right. We okay on time. So I know y'all. My last meeting is 8:30, and the traffic it'll cool off a little bit when I head to this last one.
And just want to say
She
hello.
get her
to-
questions. You get a question?
Yes, to trustee Danny Norris. Wave your hand,
Yeah, Danny,
Harris
good to see
County Department of Education. Okay, an actual budget question. Can you clarify for them the limitations of grants? Because you did show on that chart a chunk of grants. And then don't talk about a specific bond, but just the limitations when we have a bond, any bond funding.
Sure. So for grants, generally, the majority of our grants at Harris County are either from the federal or state government. When we get those grants, it's usually a competitive process. We agree that we have to submit a budget to it within the parameters of the grant. So for example, public health might get a grant that, or one of the grants we just lost was from the CDC, and it was community health workers that would go door to door in neighborhoods with disparate health outcomes and do education. And so we can't spend that money. We can't go back to the federal government and the CDC and say, hey, we don't want community health workers. We actually want more police officers or flooding or whatever it is. On a lot of our grants are capital, so those are the building of something. We can't say, Department of Housing and Urban Development, we've decided we're not going to build that ditch. We're actually going to go and build a new hospital. So we agree when we apply for the grants and when we receive the grants, and it's going to be within a very limited scope of work that is that they set. On bonds, the bonds are typically for very specific purposes. So depending on what you're voting on, some are usually school districts, they have to be specific to this stadium, this building, this amphitheater. Our bonds are a little bit different. What we say is for roads, and we define roads as basically anything, sidewalk to sidewalk. So sidewalks, the bike paths, drainage in the streets are all permissible uses, and we work with the Attorney General's office at the state to set what those parameters are, and they're clearly laid out in the ballot language.
I want to stress there's something important that under the leadership of this court, Judge Hidalgo, Commissioner Garcia, Commissioner Briones, and me in particular, we talked about, somebody said, how do you fund prioritize where you have new growth. With all of these toll roads that we paid for with bonds, a bond, by the way, is just a credit card. That's how I made my living. Used to call us merchants of debt. So don't think when it's a bond, all of a sudden it's free, right? Pretty fast. It's a quick way of thinking, what is a bond? It's a credit card. So when you whip out that, and it's better, like with me, I pay all my credit because I used to love American Express, first credit card I got, because you had to pay it every month. Now you can stretch that out. So you can do cash, you got me, pay it up front, but usually bond money is for infrastructure. And when you build it, then you got to have the money to service it. So when you do a bond package and you go to a park, everybody wants a community center. Then none of them open on the weekends. As hot as the heck, the Dickens, most of them not open at night. With climate change. So under this court, we did these toll roads, and we built all of these so you can get all around the county. Well, some places they put toll roads like over rice paddies. Then some developer comes in with a bright idea and build a house. It was a rice paddy. There was water. Then when it rains, that was interesting. So many of you wanted money into flooding, and we're in a drought. You remember Harvey, right? Or maybe you know something the newscasters are only hinting at. Maybe it's coming again. But so what we're doing is taking some of that transportation money. It is legal. We help neighborhoods to flood. I was not there, but I'm in the government now. We made a decision to put toll roads in. We ran more impervious cover. Anytime you have impervious cover, the water cannot seep in. The water has to run somewhere. So we're taking some of that money in neighborhoods where we know we created drainage problems by building those toll roads so we could go out and get this cheaper land. Some developer come in under low standards, detention pond standards, build a community, and we flooded stuff along the way so they could get out there. So we're doing that. Now, there'll be attempts to go back and maybe stop us from doing that in the legislature. That's a big problem that we have. We also have a revenue cap. So as the state, which takes the money from sales taxes, does not give any to the county, no sales tax goes to school districts, by the way. A little goes to cities. But the state gets the sales tax money, and then they reduce how much money they put into education, as an example. And then put a cap on how much we can raise the taxes we can control, property taxes. Put a cap on what we can do. Then we had 2 years, despite growth, no new revenue. Because old language in the state law says 4 members of the Commissioners Court have to be in the room. 2 decided not to come in. So for 2 years, we had no new revenue, but we still had to keep spending. Then they go in and say, any money you put in certain categories, law enforcement, you can never take it out. So part of what I have to balance, at least for my vote, and I'll raise the issue, when our friends in law enforcement come in and say they want more money. Well, when we do that, we can never get it out, even when crime goes down. Then you got to start having discussions about who in law enforcement deals with real crime. The sheriff. The constables don't deal with violent crime to the extent the sheriff's office does. So if you got a limited amount of money, you got the state saying you can only take it from property taxes, put a cap on how much you can raise property taxes, and then say you put money in certain categories, you can never get it out. So we have to balance that equation. Now, any questions we don't answer, please put your name on it. Look, and by the way, when we stop, this is your opportunity. I know how you want to get to Mr. Ramos or you want to get to me. Guess what? A lot of things you ask me, you know what I have to do? Go ask them. Now, most politicians won't tell you, but you know, if I don't have an answer, I want to think about it for a second. I was trying to gauge in here who all moved way the heck out somewhere. I knew what I was going to say, you know, but I wanted to think about it. My mother would always tell me, Rodney, don't just say it because you know it. Think about it for a second. So I wanted to see how Mr. Ramos handled that so I could figure out how to straighten it up a little bit. But if you did not put your name on the question, tell us and tell us how to find you. Okay, let's take a couple more.
Okay, I was going to make this the last.
My
but
next, this is the last one.
Yes. Yes, because staff will stay around from the budget office for a few minutes and precinct 1 as well. I think this question speaks to, you put the dates up there and the hearings, and someone wanted to know, how can we, the community, improve our streets and make law enforcement more present? It's kind of what you said, our values, and make our neighborhood monitoring, improve our sidewalks. How can we make sure these issues are covered in the budget process?
Make sure that you encourage us to be equitable with what you do. Don't just go to the entity that shows up. We're in the city limits. So remember what I said. Precinct 1 has spent more county dollars in the city than has ever been spent by all of the precincts combined. I'm not the only one that represents parts of the city of Houston. The primary the responsibility for sidewalks, streets, drainage in the city of Houston is the city of Houston. The responsibility for it in the city of Pasadena is the city of Pasadena. The county will come in and help. So remember that. Even when I first ran, some of the council members, I saw where one said in the paper he was going to talk to Commissioner Ellis about getting some money for a community center. I was wondering, what is he smoking? How about if I call and say, I'm going to talk to the city about doing something about helping me fund the jail? I want to say this about law enforcement in communities. Under the system we have now, your neighborhood group subsidizes community patrols if you want that presence in your neighborhood. Now remember what I said. The sheriff's office deals with violent crime. We all feel better if we put, I saw what a state is saying they want a law enforcement person in every school. First they pass a law so everybody can have a gun. Anybody just walk around. Got your gun, assault weapon, whatever it is, that's constitutional carry in Texas. Then they go say, you got to have one in every school or every classroom? Every school. Then I heard some school district on NPR saying they need another $2 million. They got to pay for it. State didn't pay for it. I was thinking to myself, did I just hear somebody send me a note about $18 billion in property tax relief that came from sales tax? Let everybody have a gun, no banning turning the thing into an automatic weapon. And then you say your solution to the gun problem, killings in schools, is put a law enforcement person in every school, but you didn't pay for it. And we elected them. I'm just saying, I'm going to make the case that if we're going to have neighborhood patrols, you shouldn't just do it on the basis, I probably won't get the votes, on the basis of a neighborhood that can pay for it, because they're not paying for all of it. Am I right? The county subsidizes it by how much? What's the percentage roughly?
It's about a quarter.
About 25% of it. So that means if a neighborhood does not have their 25%, and you got to decide, do a few people in the neighborhood pay, or who have the money? Most of them will not agree to it. They want some assessment of everybody in the neighborhood. I remember where I lived, they wanted to pave the alley. Now I don't use the alley. My garage is, we can't get in the garage stuff in there, but my parking lot, my driveway is on the side of the house. I don't use the alley. So I said, tell you what, I'll pay. City's not gonna pay. I said, told my neighbors, I'll pay my pro rata share. Just everybody, whatever it comes to, tell me what it is, I'll pay my part. They said, well, everybody won't agree, so we were thinking, 4 you all would pay for it. Well, thank you. Who are the 4? I don't use it. Same way with the contract deputy patrols. The neighborhood pays 25% of it, the taxpayers. So that means the other neighborhoods pay, we pay 75, they pay 25? No,
they pay 75.
Yeah, they pay 75, we pay 25. So I think that if you're gonna have it, there are neighborhoods who don't have the 25. So that means they don't get to 75. Or I'm gonna say you ought to come up with money where you give it to them. Then at some point we gotta ask ourselves, do you really think having, use the analogy, do you really think having a law enforcement person in every school, as big as that school is, it's gonna make you feel better when you walk in? You won't feel better when that automatic weapon starts. So at some point we have to ask ourselves, is that real public safety? Even if we go raise your taxes or cut something else in that formula, we gotta cut something else or come up with more money. And if we went in and we put a constable in every neighborhood, it does make you feel better. But is that really making us safer? I don't know. That'll be a discussion to be held. All right, look, thank you for coming. Our staffs are here. Use this time to be with them. Plus, you can't go walking or whatever for another 20 minutes anyway. I'm gonna be here about 10 minutes, and I gotta get to my one last meeting. Daniel, anything else you wanna add? Thank you all for coming.